Hello, everybody. Welcome, wherever you are in your day, or maybe wherever you are in the world. Welcome to week 4 of our course. And let me just introduce here in a few minutes what I want to do in this week. So we will be starting with a reading from Gadamer, and that reading comes from a book called Truth and Method, and we'll be doing that, and then we'll be getting to a reading from Augustine. So let me just show you the switch screens here and walk you through what we're going to be doing, especially in the mini lecture on Gadamer. So what we did last week is we continued to work on the idea of the pre-modern ontotheological synthesis. We're developing our sense of the implications of this ontology, this way of thinking about reality, and the fact that it combines the divine, the anthropic, and the natural realms. Last week, we focused on the notion of Aristotelian analogy, and we became familiar with the idea that analogy is something different from univocity or equivocity. We became familiar with those terms, and we saw how those two terms really represent two extremes. And they can easily present themselves, especially to the modern mind, the scientific mind, as an either-or proposition. That if you want to avoid being a fundamentalist, well, then you necessarily see language as equivocal, as something that is made up. If you don't like that, well, then if you're uncomfortable with ambiguity, well, then you must be or if you're uncomfortable rather with complete arbitrariness, well, then you must be a univocal, a fundamentalist kind of thinker. And what Aristotle gives us is a way of thinking about language that doesn't resolve into that either or. If we live in a world where the ontotheological synthesis obtains, then one could say that we live in an analogical world. We live in a world in which meaning derives from belonging to. And we saw that in the way that Aristotle introduces multivocal predication and the notion of a set of terms taking their meaning from one key term, like the idea of urine is healthy, medicine is healthy, or diet is healthy, deriving from the notion of a healthy animal, that there's a connectedness of belonging to a relationship between the meaning of those terms, and it avoids either univocal predication or sheer equivocity. If we live in an analogical world, then one can see that the concept of proof is of limited value, because proof really belongs to modern conceptuality, the notion that, oh, you can detach yourself from a situation and that you can look at it objectively and you can prove whether a thing is so or not. It really belongs to, or at least encourages, a very modern way of approaching reality. What we might find ourselves looking for instead, if we're thinking analogically, is thinking in terms of flourishing. Am I flourishing? Is my community flourishing? Does this way of looking at reality help me and my community to flourish? We might not be able to prove that it's the right way to be, but there's a kind of evidence, if you like, from our flourishing. And if we're not flourishing, then perhaps there are problems with the way that we look at or think about our reality. Okay, so that's what we were doing last week. This week we're carrying on with thinking about the classical heritage in particular. And this is the last week that we'll really be doing that. We'll be turning the corner to Augustine proper, and we'll be doing that over the next couple of weeks. So the main points that I want you to take away from today's mini lectures on Gadamer, and then I suppose thinking of Augustine a little bit as well, is that first of all, that like Rocca, who's the guy who wrote the article introducing Aristotle's ideas of analogy, like Rocca, Gadamer introduces us to some new terms. And we're going to want to be familiar with these terms as well. So univocity and equivocity, I think, are very important concepts to know and to be able to handle, to be able to manipulate, to work with. And Gadamer will give us some more terms that I think that we're going to want to be comfortable with. I've got a whole kind of series of bullet points here. This is just an introductory slide, just a point of reference for you to come back to. So the slide's going to look pretty full by the time we're done, but no big deal, I don't think. Like Aristotle, Plato, who again is before Aristotle and teaches Aristotle, Plato recognizes certain problems in the way that we handle and think about language in relation to reality. And we're going to see Gadamer really unpack that that problematic that Plato sees and that he wants to overcome. So that relationship between language and reality. Gadamer gets us thinking a bizarre thought, bizarre especially from the modern point of view. And that thought is encapsulated in a quote from page 416, that a word has a mysterious connection with what it images. It belongs to its being. This might just seem hokey to us. It seems very old-fashioned. And it maybe seems like univocity, the idea that the word belongs to the being of the thing, as if you can just, it's just plugged right in and there's no ambiguity. Well, we'll see that there is still ambiguity. There is still something like Aristotle's notion of multivocal predication, but we're not going to get that from Plato. We're going to get that from Augustine's revision of Platonic ideas. But Gadamer is setting us up for that thought, for that insight, for that different way of thinking about the relationship between language and the world, or language and thought. What Plato wants is to save thought from, and this is such a great phrase, the demonic technologization of the sophists. He is aware that sophists manipulate language, and he wants to preserve thought from the problems that attend language. But for Gadamer, he doesn't succeed. There's a problem that's sort of inherent in the way that Plato thinks about language and invites us to think about language. And so we're gonna tease that out this week. Just looking ahead, we won't worry about this too much, even in the way that we engage the reading books 12 and 13 this week. But just looking ahead, we're going to see that Augustine's fix elevates language. That there's a problem inherent in Greek conceptuality, the way that the Greeks, both Plato and Aristotle and others, think about the relationship between language and thought, language and reality. And what Augustine does is he presents an alternative that elevates language. And we want to arrive at the place where we can see that rhetoric is the basis for confidence that the world is knowable. And to see how it is Augustine that really contributes to that development. That we'll begin to see that this week. We'll begin to see that in the way that Gadamer challenges Platonic thought. And implicitly, but what will become explicit next week, is that Gadamer is relying on Augustinian ideas. So where we're going with this is to see that the development of civilization is bound up with rhetorical inhabitation. So we really are trying to give rhetoric its proper due, and to see that rhetoric is not just a tool that people use, but a way of being in the world, and a way of performatively demonstrating an interconnected reality. All right, so that's what we're going to do this week, and I'll get to the Gadamer reading itself in the next little mini lecture. Okay, we'll leave it there for now.